RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A Māori health leader says the low rate of booster or third shots of COVID vaccine in South Auckland shows authorities have failed to deliver for Māori. Although 87.2% of Counties Manukau DHB's eligible Māori population have had 2 doses, just 53.8% have had 3, the lowest rate in the country. Dawidi Jansen says there's still a lot of work to do to achieve equity in the vaccine rollout.
I think we should actually understand it as being a failure of our health system to deliver a vaccination program that's equitable. 53.8% is concerning.
Auckland health authorities say just 11% of people hospitalised with COVID over the past month have had all 3 shots. Today's number of new community cases of COVID-19, 14,128, is the lowest this month. The last time there were fewer cases was February the 26th, when 13,600 were recorded. Tom Kitchen reports.
Today's number is well down on yesterday's 19,500. There are 943 people in hospital with the virus, slightly up from yesterday's 930, and 25 of them are in intensive care or high dependency units. 5 more COVID-related deaths have been reported, 2 in Auckland and 1 each in Waikato, Canterbury and Hutt Valley. Of these people, 1 was in their 50s, 2 were in their 70s and 2 in their 80s. 2 were women and 3 were men.
A Queenstown accommodation provider expects the resort town will be in high demand from Australian visitors, especially over winter. Those wishing to cross the Tasman can start arriving from April the 13th. The Reece Hotel's chief executive, Mark Rose, says the bookings started coming in within minutes of the government's border announcement on Wednesday.
I have no doubt that we're going to be inundated with Australians over the coming months. I mean, they've made up about 40% of my business over the years. I have no doubt at all that that will be back to where it was and probably even stronger for this first 6 months.
Mark Rose says their next challenge will be doubling staff from 50 to 100 within a few months, so the influx of guests can be catered to. Turkey has disclosed details of a proposal by Russia apparently aimed at bringing a halt to the war in Ukraine. It was discussed in a phone call between the 2 countries' presidents. The BBC's Lise Doucette reports.
In all of these mediations, and there are very eager mediators, it has to be said, President Putin wants Ukraine to renounce any ambition to join NATO. That's something Ukraine is willing to discuss. The job of the diplomats is to come up with some forms of words, and they are making progress. But the job of the military commanders for President Putin is to make progress on the ground. And Russia is nowhere near getting what it wants most of all, a corridor along the southern coast between the Crimea and eastern Ukraine. And Mariupol, in the middle, is cursed by geography. It stands in the way. 3 men have denied charges relating to the death of a Nelson man last month. 22-year-old Lake Takimoana died after being shot at a Washington Road property in Nelson. Tukotahi King is charged with murder and Tremaine Tufre Ross with being party to the murder. Both pleaded not guilty when they appeared in the High Court today. They're due to stand trial in July. A third man, Alan Norman, is charged with aggravated burglary and has also pleaded not guilty. 5 pilot whales from a group that stranded on Farewell Spit yesterday were refloated today, but 2 then stranded again. 36 whales were spotted beached on the Spit last night, and by this morning all but 5 had died. Those 5 were refloated with the high tide this morning, but 1 was later found beached several kilometres away, along with the deceased pilot whale, and had to be euthanased. A second whale beached near Puponga is being cared for by Project Jonah medics. To sport, and the chance of playing at another Football World Cup is motivating All Whites skipper Winston Reid. After leaving West Ham last year, the 33-year-old is still searching for a club. He now lives and trains in Dubai, which means he's available for the entire Oceania World Cup qualifying tournament.
The goal is to get it to another World Cup. We've got a good chance of doing that. You know, we have to take step by step. But yeah, just really enjoy being part of the environment. So hopefully we can do really well.
New Zealand's first game is against Papua New Guinea tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, the Phoenix men play the Newcastle Jets in the A-League tonight. And New Zealand shot putter Tom Walsh isn't about to give up his world indoor title easily, despite coming up against Olympic champion and world record holder Ryan Krauser of the United States in Belgrade this weekend. Walsh, the two-time defending champion, doesn't compete indoors often, so is keen to keep his impressive record going.
World Indoors has been very good to me. I kind of came upon the scene at World Indoors 8 years ago now. I haven't had a bad run. I've had 3 comps indoors and I've gone third, then I've won the other 2. So it's been pretty faithful to me, mate.
New Zealand has 5 athletes competing in Belgrade this weekend. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Gabriel Gatehouse has tracked down what he calls ground zero of the QAnon conspiracy. You know, Hillary Clinton's cabal of paedophiles, etc., goes back to the 1990s, or even the 15th century. Noelle McCarthy's memoir about herself and her mother is a heartbreaker. And Anne Goldstein, the literary translator who has become a celebrity after her work on the novels of the mysterious Elena Ferrante. Call Kim Hilleho. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 here on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, scattered showers. Some may be heavy with possible thunderstorms easing tomorrow afternoon. Waikato and Bay of Plenty is mainly fine, but you also have isolated showers. Waitomo to North Taranaki, including Central High Country, mostly fine. Isolated showers tomorrow evening. Mainly fine in South Taranaki to Wellington, also for Gisborne to Wairarapa. There are a few showers about coastal Hawke's Bay and Gisborne clearing this evening. Partly cloudy in Marlborough and Nelson. Isolated showers mainly about the ranges. Isolated showers in Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Some are heavy and possibly thundery in Bulla today. Rain is developing in Fiordland tonight, spreading north to about Bruce Bay tomorrow. Rain clearing from tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, Otago and Southland are mainly fine. Isolated showers tomorrow afternoon about the High Country and eastern Otago. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, a few showers tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Omicron has put the brakes on booster vaccine rates and the communities lagging behind could be set to stay there for some time. Just 11% of Aucklanders in hospital with COVID have been boosted. Instead of trying to get everyone boosted as soon as possible, health officials now have the challenge of telling some people who've had COVID to wait. Katie Todd explains.
County's Manukau District Health Board has the lowest booster rate for Māori anywhere in the country at 53%. That's despite 87% of the region's Māori population having had 2 doses and nearly 73% of New Zealand's eligible population being boosted overall. It's a major frustration for Māori health leader Dr. Rawiri Jansen.
I think we should actually understand it as being a failure of our health system to deliver a vaccination program that's equitable. 53.8% is concerning, given that the unvaccinated, people who haven't reached all of their vaccinations that they're eligible for, are actually at much more significant risk of impact from Omicron.
Te Puia Winiata is the chief executive of Turuki Health, a Māori health provider in Mangere. From what she's seen, she believes people are now too focused on Omicron to think about getting vaccinated.
Omicron hit us in February with vengeance, and out in South Auckland we've had high numbers of people who have tested positive. In that kind of environment, we were seeing a reduction in people coming forward for the vaccination and actually being more concerned around testing.
Today, after announcing another 14,128 infections and a total of 943 people with COVID-19 in hospital, the Northern Region Health Coordination Centre's Dr. Anthony Jordan was keen to set out exactly why getting a booster is important.
Over the last month here in Tamaki Makaurau, only 11% of hospitalisations have been in those who have had their booster. You are 9 times less likely to end up in hospital if you have had your booster.
However, fixing the gaps in the country's booster coverage could now take quite some time. After months urging people to get boosted as soon as possible, health authorities now have the challenge of sharing the opposite message. They're asking people who've had the virus to stand down until their immunity wanes before getting a booster. Vaccinologist and University of Auckland Associate Professor Helen Patoussis-Harris says that will ensure people's boosters are as effective as possible, even if it slows down the overall rollout.
A 3-month delay can give a person who's had the Omicron opportunity to again mature that immunity and then boost later on. But that I would expect will lead to some delays.
However, Te Punia Winiata says health authorities don't want to put people off by sending mixed messages about when to get a booster. As COVID-19 cases reach a peak in Auckland, she says her organisation is working on clear messaging and information for whānau about getting a third jab.
We're really hoping that it just gives a breather to whānau to be able to get their heads around coming in to get their boosters, and for us to be able to provide good advice about when that's going to be best for them.
Dr Rawiri Jansen says the amount of resources poured into the country's vaccination program is gradually being dialed back, but he says there is still a lot to do to reach equity in the vaccine rollout.
It is 11 minutes past 5. We'd like to know, have you had your booster? If you're eligible for one, have you had it? And if not, why not? Do let us know. Text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Prime Minister has gone on a marketing blitz to reel Australians to our shores. Tourism operators are racing to ramp up in time, with less than 4 weeks to go before those crossing the Tasman can touch down. And Queenstown businesses expect demand could be high, and they're questioning how they'll find enough staff in time. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Well, it could be time to pack your bags and book a holiday, because travel to New Zealand is back on from next month.
Dust off your skis and find your passport. It's time for a trip to New Zealand. Beaming in from the shores of Lake Wakatipu in Queenstown, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told Australian breakfast show Sunrise, Aotearoa can't wait to have them back.
I cannot remember a time when we've been so excited about the prospect of seeing as many Australians as possible come and visit us. So you can expect to get the warmest welcome you can imagine.
She's been speaking with tourist operators around Queenstown today and acknowledges that they need more support to find enough staff in time.
We traditionally haven't had to market particularly, but in this environment right now, I have been talking with Tourism New Zealand, and I'd like to bring Immigration New Zealand in to work together around promoting New Zealand as a working holiday option to try and bring in that extra workforce we need.
NZ Ski's Paul Anderson was thrilled to see images of Coronet Peak and other iconic vistas beam back to Australia as part of the Prime Minister's trip today. But he told her the hot topic is how to find enough staff. Recruitment is underway for the Three Mountains, which usually has about 1,250 workers. He says they're on the lookout for more snow sport staff.
There'll be 400 to 500 of them we will need in Queenstown. That's probably 100 to 200 more than we had in previous years. The other parts of our operation, really we need a certain number of people just to be able to operate the ski area regardless of how many people are on it.
And he hasn't ruled out getting extras just in case COVID takes a toll on their workforce.
We may need more staff this year because of absenteeism. If COVID is still going through the community, we need to be really aware of that and be able to manage absenteeism that a lot of businesses are suffering from at the moment.
The Rees Hotel's chief executive, Mark Rose, says the border announcement is the best news he's had during the pandemic.
2 minutes after she started speaking and that date came out, we started getting bookings. And there's been a steady flow of them ever since.
Friends, family and travel agents in Australia got in contact after seeing the Prime Minister's appearance on Sunrise.
I have no doubt that we're going to be inundated with Australians over the coming months. I mean, they've made up about 40% of my business over the years. I have no doubt at all that that will be back to where it was, and probably even stronger for this first 6 months.
The hotel has gone from 120 staff to 50 over the past 2 years. But Mark Rose says that needs to double within a few months.
We'll need 100 staff working at the hotel by about the 20th of June, probably a little earlier to give them the training and things to get the standards up. If we're not at that level, we will slow down the sales of our rooms so that we won't close rooms down, but we just won't have them up for sale. It's much more important that we offer great service than it is for us to be piling people in and putting money in the bank.
A long 2 years for operators, but it seems there's finally light at the end of the tunnel.
It's time to get back to normal, according to National, and for the opposition party, that means immediately ditch all requirements for vaccine passes, shorten the COVID ISO period from 7 to 5 days, forget about scanning, and the party's also put a date on scrapping the traffic light system and phasing out mandates. Cabinet's said to be reviewing all the government's restrictions with an announcement expected next week, but National leader Chris Luxon got in first, and he joins us now. Kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Are your recommendations safe?
Yeah, sorry, say that again.
The recommendations that you are making here to ditch these various, I suppose, safety nets, do you know that they're safe, your recommendations?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're 95% vaccinated. Most importantly, I think the most important thing is 85% of people in every DHB over the age of 60 is now boosted, which is our most vulnerable age group. And, we're through the peak in Auckland. We're very much, getting there in the rest of the country. And we really should get ready to get going and getting back to some normalcy. And it's important that, frankly, the government's instinct should be to remove restrictions and get us back to normal life as soon as they're no longer justified. And when you start to look at vaccine passes and mandates, with the threat of Omicron being so different from previous variants, we think there's actually, it's a good time for us to start to be moving forward.
Hey, your cell phone line is just a bit dodgy there, so can I just get you to switch to the other leg, because we do want to hear what you're saying. Did you get expert advice, and if so, who did you take it from?
Well, we see advice, and we look at what's happening around the world, and we look at where New Zealand is at, and it's just quite obvious to us that now's the right time.
But you didn't. Hey, I want to be clear on this, because that sounds a bit fudgy. So, did you actually take your ideas to experts in this particular area and ask them what they thought of what you were recommending?
It's quite obvious, Lisa, that there's vaccine passes and vaccine mandates. Omicron is less. It has less utility, less relevance at this time after Omicron. All around the world, that's been the case studies and what we've seen.
Right, so that's a no.
We can say immediately, let's start dropping scanning requirements. Most people aren't doing it anyway. Vaccine passes for all but large indoor events right now, we could stop. And let's get rid of vaccine mandates for kids under the age of 18 so they get back to sports. And they're doing everything outside. There's very little transmission that's happening with people outside.
So what about masks? What's your position on them?
Well, look, there'll be a need for us to continue to, wear masks, particularly probably it will remain very important indoors. There'll be a need to continue to use rapid antigen tests, which we've been campaigning for a long time, just to limit spread, and there'll be a need for household contacts to still be isolating. And so those three things would need to continue on just to manage the risk that we have. But the reality, Lisa, is that we have to keep evolving our mindset, because if we keep being locked in a 2020 mindset and we keep dribbling things out, we need to say, look, the risk is different, the threat is different. If it's lowered, which it is, let's change our set of actions. If there's another variant that comes down the road, we revisit it again, we put a different set of actions and mitigations in place.
So there's only basically one circumstance where you think a vaccine pass is required, and that's large crowds. How big and in what circumstances?
Well, it's large indoor crowds at the moment inside New Zealand, and what we're saying is April 13th, you'd actually remove that as you deal with visitors coming in and out of the country. You actually would remove the traffic light system altogether when you've got Australians arriving April 13th.
And you want to scrap pre-departure tests. How many extra cases would that result in coming to the country, do you know?
Well, it doesn't really matter. I mean, from our point of view, the bottom line is the risk is not
so
at the border.
again,
the risk is
sorry to interrupt, Chris, because it's important. So I just want to be clear, whether you've done this background work, you don't know how many more cases that would create.
I can't tell you the number of cases. What I can tell you is that from April the 13th, if you've got Australians coming and the government said they're good to come, you can scrap the traffic light system, because how do they use vaccine passes in our restaurants? You can abolish pre-departure testing, and you can start to phase out vaccine mandates. Obviously, the last would be phased out would be health workers. So
are you comfortable with covering the cost of healthcare for visitors who may be coming into the country with COVID?
So, Lisa, the average Australian comes here for a 5-day trip. So I think the reality is going to be a very, very small number.
And international beyond that? You just named Aussies there.
That'll be the same. That'll be the same. I mean, people coming in and out of the country, typically the Australians have a five-day trip. We used to have 1.5 million. It's going to take us a long time to get back to any normal level of tourism in this country. It requires a lot of effort to promote New Zealand overseas. Of course, we've been out of action for a long time. And so the visitor numbers aren't going to just bounce back immediately. They're going to take a lot of time to build back properly.
Does Dr. Shane Retty agree with all of this?
Yes.
And did you consult him specifically around the safety of these measures before putting this out?
Chris Bishop will have spoken to Dr. Shane Retty about that, but I can tell you these...
But you didn't?
No, I haven't, Lisa. But the point is very simple, is you've got to start to think about the risk and manage the risk that we have today. And, what we're saying to you is, look, it's okay, it's normal, we've got to progressively start to manage this, and now's a good time for us to be saying, hey, listen, let's take the next step together as a country, and let's get moving forward. I
understand what you're saying and the concept that you've put forward, but you keep using this phrase, get back to normal. Well, what is normal? There is no going back, is there?
No, it's a different normal. But what I'm saying is we're living in a lot of fear, and the point is we can get locked into a mindset that actually isn't relevant for the risk that we actually have in front of us today. And the risk is what we've got to be managing. And risk management means you go up and you go down based on what you're seeing and what you're experiencing. And what we're saying is, look, Omicron's a very different risk. We have a different set of tools available to us now, vaccine, rapid antigen tests, antivirals, all sorts of things. And so the risk is very different.
Appreciate your time this evening. Thank you for joining us. That is the National Party leader, Christopher Luxon there. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Do you agree with that? Get rid of vaccine passes, basically, lower isolation periods from 7 days to 5 for people with COVID, and get rid of pre-departure tests. Also, a number of other things. Get rid of the traffic light system once we bring Aussies in too. That is the National Party's plan. Text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealand has released its Russian blacklist as the government debuts sanctions on Vladimir Putin's regime. MPs passed legislation last week paving the way for such punitive action, but there are questions as to why one particular billionaire is not on the list. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
New Zealand lining up with the rest of the West, rolling out Russian sanctions in response to the invasion of Ukraine.
We continue to keep open our diplomatic channels because we do seriously hope that there might be a way through this, although that window is looking very slim.
The Foreign Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, released the initial blacklist today, those banned from entering New Zealand or owning any assets here. It includes the Russian President Vladimir Putin and 12 of his key supporters. 19 organisations have also been targeted, including the Cossack National Guard and state-backed bank PSB. Law expert Al Gillespie from Waikato University says it's a good start.
It's largely symbolic because I don't think you're going to see many of these people coming down to New Zealand, but it's the beginning of a much longer process.
More notable, perhaps, are the names not on the list, in particular the billionaire Alexander Abramov. The Russian oligarch owns a $50 million luxury lodge on Northland's east coast and was behind numerous housing developments. Greenpeace sent protest boats to his estate last week, demanding the government freeze his assets. Its Programme Director, Niamh O'Flynn, says the government's moving too slowly.
Oligarchs, by very definition, have political power due to their wealth. Whether or not Abramov is directly tied to the war, he is in the sphere of influence of Putin, and we need to be using our power to pull on him to end the war.
Alexander Abramov is a major shareholder in the steel giant Evraz, which is accused of providing material for Russian tanks, though Evraz denies that. National's Jerry Brownlee says New Zealand officials have questions to answer.
If they have concluded that he is not a problem, then they'd have to explain why other shareholders in the steel company have been so soundly sanctioned by other countries.
Alexander Abramov is not on any country's sanctions list, but another Evraz shareholder, Roman Abramovich, has been targeted by the UK, EU and Canada. Al Gillespie says New Zealand is right to follow due process.
The risk is that it can develop into an anti-Russian hysteria. Just because they're Russian doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad.
The government won't comment on individual cases, but Ms Mahuta says officials are investigating Russians with notable investments here.
We just need to ensure that we have a robust framework to determine which individuals the level of association, and obviously through intelligence gathering, ensure that we've got information to back that up.
Today then, just the first set in a series of sanctions to come.
The days of sharing your Netflix password with freeloaders, that's the next door neighbours, the kids at uni, extended family, etc., could be about to end. More than 2 million Kiwis have a Netflix account, but the streaming giant has started a trial in Chile, Peru and Costa Rica. Well, they'll charge more for people who use a Netflix account, which they describe as outside the household. Well, joining us now is Paul Spain, the CEO of Gorilla Technology. Kia ora, Paul.
Kia ora, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Is this just a money grab?
Pretty much. I mean, what we've got here is a commercial entity that pours billions of dollars into content, and the more that they get coming in from their subscribers, that allows them to keep investing back into the content. And what Netflix want to do is to completely, on a long-term basis, differentiate their offering from what everybody else in the market is doing. Whether that's Amazon, who are pouring more money in. We've got Apple and then local competitors such as Neon here in New Zealand, and they really want to continue with as much dominance as possible. But for that all to play out well, ultimately they've got to return a good profit, and so any way they can do that, they're keen to do.
Wouldn't they be making a mint with the pandemic? People locked up at home, what they did was watch hours and hours of content. So wouldn't they have made a lot of money due to that?
It has been very, very helpful for them, but relative to their share price, they're a little bit like a lot of other tech startup firms. Not that they're really in a startup phase anymore. They've been going a long time. But there's a lot of somewhat speculative, forward-looking investment into firms like Netflix, and actually, their current profits, don't really reflect their current share price. So that's part of the challenge they have to weigh up, is their desire to have a huge audience and to dominate the market, which I think in most markets they do very well. But when you weigh that up against the actual profitability, they're not a hugely profitable firm. They're not giving out dividends to their shareholders, and so at some point they've got to end up returning more in terms of profit than they do today.
So what they're going to do is they're going to ping all of us who are giving our password and code to friends, family, whatever, and have got a bunch of us all logged on to the same account. We're paying one fee and everyone's enjoying the spoils, right? How are they going to know? How are they going to catch us, Paul?
Well, they've already put in place or started to put in place multi-factor authentication. So when somebody goes and, signs in, now, they're starting to get you to verify that through, a text message. And then over time, they'll just put more and more sort of lockdowns in place. They limit the number of, devices, whether that's TVs, phones, tablets that are linked into the account. So, and we've seen this with some of the other services here in the New Zealand market, where there is a little bit of a limitation. We see it on, some of the news sites that you sign in for. If you are using on multiple devices, they don't make it a very nice experience. And so Netflix has always tried to be really nice to use from that perspective. Like it's I don't remember any time I've ever had Netflix say you're logged in from too many devices. Look, you're using this from the United States, but you've signed up in New Zealand, or any of those sorts of scenarios when I travel. But as time goes on, maybe it's going to be a little bit less comfortable, particularly for those that are sharing their account.
Yeah, well, you raised the travel thing, right? Part of the selling point is that this is transportable. You watch it when you want, where you want, right? So are they then going to, do you think, stop us, geo-block us, basically? Because if you go on an overseas trip or whatever, you can log on and you can watch your Netflix.
I don't think they'll probably do a across the board geo-blocking anytime soon. I think there is going to continue to be a level of flexibility, but looking at those locations might be something that they consider. However, I would tend to think that the sharing that happens today is probably more people within your same country anyway in most cases. So maybe limiting how many devices you can be logged into. Certainly, they're already limiting how many streams you can watch concurrently. And there's a few workarounds for that. You can download the content to an iPhone or an iPad, then turn off the Wi-Fi and stream while other people are streaming. So there's one or two workarounds. Yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, there's a few hacks you can get around. We're out of time, but very quickly, can I get a yes or no? Do you reckon they're going to bump up the prices too?
Yes, that'll keep coming.
Appreciate your time, Paul. That's Paul Spain, the CEO of Gorilla Technology. E te iwi e hariakine e a checkpoint. COVID antibody tests will soon be available at pharmacies, but what will they actually tell you about your risk or immunity? The tributes flow for Suweira Gardner, a man who devoted much of his life to public service, and the environmental costs of getting to work if it's not a wander to the kitchen table. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme today. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anei a iwi mina pita pita kōrero.
A Māori health leader says booster rates in South Auckland show authorities have failed to deliver for Māori. Although 87.2% of county's Manukau District Health Board's eligible Māori population have had 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, just 53.8% have had a third. That's the lowest rate in the country. Dr. Dawiri Jansen says there's still a lot of work to do to achieve equity in the vaccine rollout. Today's number of new community cases of COVID, 14,128, is the lowest this month. The last time there were fewer cases was February the 26th, when 13,600 were recorded. Hospitals in the Wellington region will only carry out urgent surgery next week as Hutt Valley and Capital and Coast DHBs come under pressure from COVID. The DHBs say only cardiac surgery and acute and cancer-related procedures will be carried out. Planned care or appointments that are not clinically safe to defer will go ahead as originally scheduled. The Canterbury DHB has cancelled about 100 surgeries in the last week due to the coronavirus. Turkey has disclosed details of a proposal by Russia aimed at bringing a halt to the war in Ukraine. Among Russia's demands is Ukraine disarming and giving up its bid to join NATO. Another is thought to be Ukraine effectively giving up the eastern coast, so Russian-controlled Crimea and the Donbas region join up. An estimated 30,000 people have been able to flee the eastern port of Mariupol, but about 10 times more remain trapped in the city. The National Party wants to know why the oligarch Alexander Abramov doesn't feature on New Zealand's initial blacklist for Russian sanctions. The government has imposed its first tranche of sanctions on Vladimir Putin, 12 key supporters and 19 organisations. And 5 surviving whales from a group of pilot whales that stranded on Farewell Spit have been successfully refloated, but 2 have stranded again, with 1 needing to be euthanised. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora rā, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hua anainei, ko Nona Peltier, who is here to talk business. Nona, the Financial Markets Authority has found itself on the naughty step over, failing to disclose a potential conflict of interest. What are the details here?
Yeah, so this occurred, last year. The Minister of Commerce asked for a review regarding the handling of a review the FMA was doing into KiwiSaver default providers. And it turned out that the then chief executive, Rob Everett, was related to a senior executive at one of the KiwiSaver providers, a company called Booster, which subsequently was reappointed as a default provider. But it turns out that while he joined the FMA in 2014 and disclosed that relationship, it wasn't raised at the time of the review, and it wasn't known to the chair or anyone else. And so subsequently, the FMA has been told to be more upfront, to to disclose again anything that's relevant, rather than just sort of have it buried on your report someplace in a file cabinet or what have you. So it turns out that the FMA are going to change their processes to make sure they're just as accountable as everybody else.
Okay, well, they're not the only ones that are getting the sideways look. Commerce Commission also getting a ticking off from the telco industry. Now, what's all that about?
Yeah, so the Commerce Commission has come out with a report which basically says that New Zealanders are being charged more than the average for OECD countries when it comes to broadband services. But the telecommunications industry says, wait a minute, you're not comparing apples with apples, so to speak. They're saying that the Commerce Commission has used capped plans, so broadband with capped data usage and so on, which aren't particularly popular here in New Zealand. What's more popular are those unlimited plans with high speeds. So what the Commerce Commission did was compare very low specified plans against other low specified plans and found them to be more expensive. Well, the Telecommunications Forum says when you look at the services most people are taking, which are those high speed unlimited caps, we're actually cheaper than the OECD average. And they're saying, be fair, be realistic.
And what market numbers have you got for us, Nona?
Well, we have done really well. I think it appears to me we've been outperforming the region today. The NZX Top 50 Index, it closed up 177 points. That's a gain of 1.5%, and that's to 12,176. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 68.8 US cents, 94.1 Australian, and 52.3 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with Business News. There's concern a pharmacy test for COVID antibody levels will lull people into a false sense of security or send them into a panic unnecessarily. Biotech company Orbis Diagnostics says it's teaming up with pharmacies to trial an in-store immunity testing device that quickly and accurately measures a person's antibody concentration as a result of COVID vaccination. Now, antibodies are the things that help your body fight infection, and the company reckons measuring them will mean people can determine their risk level. But other experts say it is not that simple. Back with us is the president of New Zealand's Institute of Medical Laboratory Science, Terry Taylor. Hi, Terry. How useful is it knowing your antibody levels when it comes to COVID?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, look, a lot of the data that's been out there that has been collected was done back in the days of Delta, when Delta was our dominant strain. And some of the data was starting to match that up a little bit. But now that we've hit Omicron, realistically it all goes out the window and we're starting again with the data collection. So really there's no actual peer-reviewed correlation between what we're actually seeing antibody levels and risk of disease.
So just so we're clear on this, Terry, at the moment, we can't tell whether the level of antibodies you have in your system when it comes to Omicron determines whether you're more likely to get the virus or not, or whether you're going to get a more severe version of it or not. We simply do not know that by counting antibodies.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's no evidence at the moment that suggests that's the case. As we all know, the immunity system or our immunology within our bodies is very complex, and every person is slightly different in how they react as well. So it makes this very difficult to actually predict.
So what is the worry here? If people rush into the pharmacy and get a test and it tells them they've got high antibodies or low, what's your main concern?
Well, my main concern is actually not that they're getting the test. The fact of the matter here is that they're getting a test that's actually being run in an environment which is not by registered medical laboratory scientists. The test, we don't know how good the test is, to be honest. We already run these tests inside our very controlled environments within our diagnostic laboratory. So I guess our concerns are that this has been moved outside of the laboratory controlled environment, and we're all asking the questions, well, what do these results actually mean?
That sounds like patch protection, Terry, is it? You just don't want someone else moving in onto your territory. They've got something that you can do at the pharmacy which would cut the lab out. Not good for you guys.
There's a lot more to it than that, Lisa. Not at all. We are under siege profession, as everyone's well aware. Look, you underestimate the capability of medical laboratory scientists at your peril. I mean, we would be happy to work with these people and a system and actually working it all up. So you've got to look at the background here. Now, what sort of work was actually done on this testing regime, and what do the results compare to? Like in our laboratories, we obviously work towards WHO standards for COVID antibody testing. I mean, none of that's been coming out of the information that's coming from this company.
Are you worried that people will go in, they might get a result that says their antibodies are high and they'll essentially think they're bulletproof?
Well, the other problem that we're going to see as well is that if their levels are low, does that mean they're going to turn up at the vaccination centre demanding vaccination? I mean, that's where the correlation has not been shown to be useful. So there's all these other factors. Effectively, to me, this looks like a way of making money.
So what do you want to see happen? Because we're told the release of these testing devices is imminent and they're going to go into pharmacy chains.
Yeah, well, the problem with that, again, is the control factor. I mean, we in a diagnostic laboratory have to work in accredited facilities with registered medical practitioners. Now, obviously, this instrument is just going to be put in a pharmacy. That's not a controlled environment. They're not an accredited laboratory. So that becomes a real issue.
Terry, while I've got you here and we're talking about controlled environments and not, how are we doing with the rat tests and people DIYing it with the rapid antigen tests?
Yeah, that's another concern that's been raised with us as well. There's methodologies that come with those rapid antigen tests for a reason. They've been validated to work to the level that they are by following exactly those instructions. So we're seeing some people saying that you can get away with swabbing your throat and your mouth and all sorts of other places. Unfortunately, these rapid antigen tests have not actually been validated or verified for this. So that it becomes a problem. We don't, in a laboratory, for example, look for a positive. We don't go, oh my God, that should be positive, let's make it positive. That almost appears to be what's happening here.
So you're concerned that some high-profile people are suggesting that, I call it the swizzle stick, the thing that's supposed to go up your nose. They're advising people to put it in their mouth, and that's not a tried-and-true method.
Well, it's not validated for those kits. So effectively, does that then mean that the result that comes out is effectively null and void?
Do you want someone to come out and clear this up?
Oh, definitely, and I think there's an opportunity coming up, I think, for a bit of a question and answer session on just the contraindications of all of this sort of work.
Good to talk to you, Terry. Thanks for joining us. That is Terry Taylor, who is the president of New Zealand's Institute of Medical Laboratory Science. Ooh, a lot of you people getting in touch with us about Christopher Luxon and National's kind of bullet point plan, I should say, for opening up New Zealand and getting back to normal, as they put it. They basically want to get rid of vaccination mandates, certificates and pre-travel testing are among some of the things. This person reckons it's a great idea. Great to hear Chris Luxon being so positive and so proactive about New Zealand moving forward out of the controlled, restrictive mindset we have been forced into over the last 2 years. The traffic light system is now redundant. It should be gone tomorrow. This person says, so Chris Luxon hasn't checked plans out with an expert. Now ask Professor Rod Jackson for his expert opinion on Luxon's plan. Another listener says, why do we have to have health advice from a politician? Ludicrous Luxon, this listener says, Auckland has peaked, down south we haven't. But on the other side of the coin, where is this one? I've lost it, and all the ones who disagree with the plan. Someone else says, sounds like a bunch of reckons from Christopher Luxon, hasn't even talked about this to his MPs, let alone actual experts. Does he realise it's about running a country, not running an airline? Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, and tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. There was another person who did agree with Christopher Luxon, but I'm just finding it a bit difficult to get to it. Oh yeah, no, I'm told it's this one. Yes, we do need to move on. It's time for progression, not being hamstrung by Jacinda and her Keep Safe team of 5 million BS. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. The work-from-home nature of the Omicron outbreak has struck a tough blow to inner cities across the country. But the move to home base has been a boon for some suburban eateries who have been enjoying increased trade with more people sticking around the neighbourhood. Our reporter Somya Bamidi-Pati and cameraman Angus Drever went to see some in Wellington.
The streets of the capital city are emptier these days as the Omicron outbreak whips through the country and New Zealand remains at the red light setting. But head out of the city and into the burbs, and we find a queue of people getting their coffee fix from Jip Street Deli and Cafe.
People just need to get out, they get cabin fever, so they just need a break, and yeah, it's been incredibly busy.
This is Karori, one of New Zealand's largest suburbs.
We're at sort of pre-Christmas levels, and pre-Christmas is our busiest time. So every week is like a week before Christmas, turnover-wise.
Owner Sam Peters says while he's grateful for all the support, he's also looking forward to being a little quieter.
Town has always been fantastic, Lambton Quay and Cuba Street, and I'm quite concerned that people are suffering in town. And so whilst it's been absolutely fantastic for us, I'm also sort of sympathetic to what's going on in town, and it is a bit of a concern. So hopefully it will level out.
Over in Miramar, Cafe Polo owner Briar Thompson says while the overall turnover is largely unchanged, she's noticed different groups of people and a change in peak times.
All the Weta studios are around here and we do get a lot of trade off them. With them being able to work from home at the moment, we've kind of had a drop in their trade, but then an increase in our kind of usual weekend customers, so they're coming in more during the week. What we have noticed recently though is that with other cafes closing due to isolation, we then got busier. They are open again now, so we're all back to sharing all the same customers. But there are also a lot of our customers isolating, which means that we're not seeing them.
Meanwhile, in Lower Hutt, Giannis Bakare owner Angela Giannis says she's seeing more workers and fewer families with children.
Do you see people who might otherwise work in the city coming to, say, the bakery or the cafe for lunch now?
Yes, definitely. On the nicer days, it's been fantastic because we do have a large courtyard with seating, which is great for social distancing too. And I think people from the CBD do like that environment of the hustle and bustle of busy cafes and being able to have their meetings in the cafe too. So that's been really helpful.
Patrick McKibben from the Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce says while some businesses in his area have benefited from people not travelling into Wellington CBD, others are still struggling. He says retailers, especially within Queensgate Mall, have reported increased spendings on items like housewares, but hospitality businesses are feeling the pinch. And while the number of people staying local has increased during the pandemic, he says there have been fewer people out and about over the last 2 weeks.
We have seen an increase in the number of workers working from home and therefore in our city at various times. The last 2 weeks, however, last 2 to 3 weeks, a very different story. As Omicron started to take shape, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, about Omicron. And so people are staying at home, they are looking after their families and isolating. So we've definitely seen a drop-off over the last 2 to 3 weeks.
Businesses in the city and suburb alike, hoping people come out and pass through their doors.
And do check out the video version of that story. We'll put it up on our webpage. The 4-week-long war in Ukraine continues, but Russian troops appear to have stalled in their advance on cities, including the capital, Kiev. In Mariupol, the only city to fall so far, rescue work is still going on after a Russian bomb hit a theatre in the town. It appears most of the 1,000 people sheltering in the basement have escaped injury. The devastation and horror drags on, as Andrew McRae reports.
In Mariupol, about 400,000 people are sheltering in the port city that's been under siege for the last 2 weeks. It's the only location separating advancing Russian troops from the south and east. Residents have been forced underground and food, water and medicine continues to be in short supply. Here's a local official.
They are destroying everything round the clock, and they don't let any humanitarian cargo into our blocked city. For 5 days, Russian troops have not stopped the shelling to prevent the rescue of our people.
Joe English works for UNICEF, the UN's children's charity. He says a child every second is leaving Ukraine, a staggering 1.5 million.
We estimate that 4,500, probably more children have been born into this conflict. And you can only imagine for an expectant mother, an expectant father, how it must feel knowing that you're bringing a baby into this situation.
He says while more than 50 children have been killed, the true number is likely to be higher.
This isn't a childhood. We need to be providing these kids with peace and an opportunity to start rebuilding their lives.
The World Health Organization has verified 43 attacks on healthcare facilities in Ukraine and that healthcare workers are among the dead and injured. The WHO's Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, has told the UN Security Council that such attacks were a violation of international humanitarian law.
Prolonged conflict is in nobody's interest and will only prolong the suffering of the most vulnerable. The life-saving medicine we need right now is peace.
The UN's Under-Secretary-General for Political and Peace Building, Rosemary DiCarlo, says there have been 1,900 confirmed civilian casualties so far.
The total consists of 726 people killed, including 52 children. The actual number is likely much higher. There will be no winners to this senseless conflict. The tremendous loss it is causing, on the other hand, is heartbreakingly clear.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of building a new wall against freedom in Europe through its invasion of his country. During a video address to the lower house of the German parliament, President Zelensky said sanctions against Moscow were not enough.
It's a wall in Central Europe between freedom and bondage, and this wall is growing bigger with every bomb on Ukraine, with every decision that is not made for the sake of peace.
Turkey has outlined proposals by Russia apparently aimed at bringing a halt to the war in Ukraine. It includes recognising the annexation of Crimea, that Ukraine should be neutral, and protection of the Russian language in Ukraine. Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova, poured scorn on the proposals.
We're always ready to negotiate, but I think we all will see the end of successful negotiations when Russian troops will stop shelling at us and get out from our country. If Russians will stop shooting, this war will end.
Russia has accused the United States of stoking Russophobia and said it had the power to put its brash enemies into place.
Earlier in the program, we were talking about COVID boosters and whether you were eligible and had gone and got one. Well, Linda's got in touch to say, get your booster? I haven't been able to do that until today. I go to the pharmacy and get told we don't do them Friday. First time I can get my booster there is the 29th. How ridiculous. Surely it's not rocket science to draw one up for anyone who walks in. Another person says we need to stop saying 96% vaccinated. 2 doses is not fully vaccinated. Interesting, because that's how they record the stats, even though we're getting a different message. And someone who's 82's got in touch to say, of course I've had my booster. Self-responsibility is necessary. The government can't do everything. And this one, I've had my booster a month ago, am over 60 and was exposed to Omicron as a household contact. I'm thrilled I had no symptoms. 2 thumbs up emoji. And finally, can we please stop blaming the government and health service for slow uptake of vaccine boosters? There are no excuses after all of this time. The Abuse and Care Royal Commission has been challenged by survivors to drive genuine change, not just another rebrand. Today was the final day of a 2-week hearing into Māori experiences of abuse. Māori News reporter Jamie Tahana has been following the hearing.
The hearing opened a fortnight ago with Tupua Ehrlich, who spoke of his experience in state care in the 90s and early 2000s. He told of how he was torn from his whānau, sent to strangers who beat him every day, how he was ignored and belittled when he tried to tell social workers what was happening. He was back today, the final day, with a challenge.
There's someone who has been through this and now taking part in this Royal Commission process. The challenge is to the commissioners, don't take mana away from what we've given you, because talking about things is not easy. But what makes it harder is when you're talking the same things over and over and over again, and the situation remains the same for our whānau.
The Commission has heard 2 weeks of painful testimony. It's heard from people who were taken from whānau, split from siblings, and placed with strangers. It's heard about state institutions where children endured physical, sexual and psychological abuse. Young people being locked in solitary confinement. And boys and girls' homes that were nothing more than criminal training grounds. It's heard of tamariki Māori being made to work as slave labour, rendered invisible. When they tried to tell someone, they were only met with the callous indifference of bureaucracy. When they tried to run away, they were returned and punished harshly. It's heard of adoption being used as a tool of assimilation. It's heard from people whose Māori names were taken away, too hard to pronounce. The hearing wrapped up today by the independent counsel assisting the Royal Commission, Julia Spellman.
The things we have heard did not happen by accident or through isolated acts of individuals. Over generations, state and faith-based systems have allowed acts of terrible violence and abuse to tamariki and vulnerable adults.
She pointed to the irony in the term care system, a system that was, and many say still is, devoid of care. Crown Counsel Melanie Baker says the accounts were deeply disturbing.
The voices of whānau Māori we have heard over these 2 weeks will help to drive changes to prevent further abuse and to inform what redress looks like for those who have suffered.
They're all words Tupua Ehrlich has heard before.
So what have I learned from a lot of my life in this space is that you can't take the Crown's word for nothing. We can't. We can't sit back and just allow this stuff to continue. We need to be listened to. There needs to be action. The patronising, the whole, oh, great that you're here and that. I don't need that. I need you to listen and I need you to act.
While today was the last day of the Māori hearing, the Royal Commission still has some way to go. It's expected to make its final recommendations next year.
The tributes have been flowing for prominent leader and public servant Suweira Gardner. He passed away with his whānau by his side in Gisborne this week. He'd been ill and was 78 years old. Anei te kairipoata a Mani Dunlop.
Suweira's career spans decades, and he was described as Mr. Fix-It. With any major issue in Aotearoa over the past 3 decades, it is highly likely he had a hand in solving it. He held numerous leadership roles. He was the first director of the Waitangi Tribunal, the first chief executive of the Ministry of Māori Development, Te Puni Kōkiri, and also served as the national director of Civil Defence, the first Māori to hold the position. Suweira served in the Vietnam War and retired as a lieutenant colonel, the highest-ranking Māori officer at the time. Leith Comer served with Suweira in the army and was mentored by him throughout his army and then professional career. He says he was an incredible leader who had relentless energy.
All of the difficult stuff that you look back over the last 20 to 30 years, you can bet your bottom dollar Suweira Gardner had a role in sorting those issues out. One of the things that people will miss is Suweira's ability to make things happen, solve issues, and to implement policy. And I think that is a skill, that is a trait that few have, but he had it in spades.
In 2009, he was made a Knight of the New Zealand Order of Merit for his contribution and services to Māori. The Prime Minister, politicians, iwi leaders, public servants and whānau have all been among the flowing tributes today, describing his legacy on his hand in shaping Aotearoa. Graham Pryor remembers him as a kid hanging out with his uncle at Te Teko, where he played rugby. Later, he worked closely with and for him, and he explains how he was a tea and scone kind of guy.
Whenever he was trying to sort anything out that was really difficult, and he had to get to the main players, the decision makers, and he would always try and sit down with people and have a cup of tea and scone, see whether they could come to a conclusion before we get on to, big huis about the decision-making that would take place in public. So maybe that's one of the things of his success, was being able to bring people up and say, let's have a cup of tea and a scone together.
His last public service role at the end of a long list was as acting chief executive of Oranga Tamariki before stepping down when he became ill last year. Minister for Children Calvin Davis worked closely with him and describes him as Mr. Fix-It.
Look, I just love the man. He was everything I needed at that time in a CE. He was straight up, he was frank, he gave no frills advice, he just told it as it was. And it's because of Suweira that Oranga Tamariki is undergoing the transformation that it is. So here's Mr. Fix-It. You just set him the mission. He was a soldier in his early years, so he knew the mission and he would just walk towards the fight.
A true public servant up until his death, as per his wish to ensure public health be prioritised and the demands on frontline workers be recognised, he asked that there will be no tangihanga. A memorial service is expected to be held at a later date. He is survived by his wife, Hikia Parata, his 5 children and 8 mokopuna. I te rangatira, I te reo o ngā tipuna, I te kaiarahi o ngā uri whakatipu, takato mai rā. Hoi rā tō waka ki Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pāmama. I te rangatira, moi mai rā. I will leave Suweira with the last word. This is him at one of his book launches, Ake Ake Kia Kaha E, Forever Brave, B Company of the 28th Māori Battalion. This is an example of his many legacies he leaves to Aotearoa and specifically to Māori.
And the full version of that story will be on our website, so please do check it out. And after 6, we'll be talking about drugs, COVID drugs, antiviral treatments that patients are not getting access to.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A Māori health leader says booster rates in South Auckland show authorities have failed to deliver for Māori. Although 87.2% of the county's Manukau DHB's eligible Māori population have had 2 doses of COVID vaccine, just 53.8% have had a third. That's the lowest rate in the country. Dawiri Jansen says there's still a lot of work to do to achieve equity in the vaccine rollout. In Auckland, just 11% of people hospitalised with COVID over the past month have had all 3 shots. Hospitals in the Wellington region will only do urgent surgery next week as the Hutt Valley and Capital and Coast District Health Boards come under pressure from COVID-19. The boards say only cardiac surgery and acute and cancer-related procedures will be carried out, but they say all decisions are made on a case-by-case basis by a patient's clinical teams. The DHBs say planned care or appointments that aren't clinically safe to defer will go ahead as scheduled. And in Canterbury, the DHB there has cancelled about 100 operations in the past week because of COVID. Spokesperson Tracy Maisie says only a small number of planned procedures are currently going ahead. She says all urgent care, including cancer care and acute surgery, is continuing, as are emergency caesareans. Ms Maisie says any deferred surgery will be rescheduled when enough staff are available. About 250 Canterbury DHB staff are currently unable to work because of the virus. The Waikato police have released footage of the moments before a motorist was viciously assaulted on the expressway a week ago. Kay Albert reports.
The footage shows a 31-year-old man in a red ute travelling north near Rangariri just before 5 in the evening. He was followed by a large convoy of motorcycles and beaten up by a group of people when he stopped and got out of the vehicle. He's now in a stable but critical condition in hospital. The police still want imagery that captures the assault itself. They're asking anyone in the area at the time with dash cam or cell phone footage to get in touch.
The National Party wants to know why the oligarch Alexander Abramov doesn't feature on New Zealand's initial blacklist for Russian sanctions. Alexander Abramov is a major shareholder in the steel giant Evraz, which is accused of providing material for Russian tanks, though Evraz denies that. He owns a luxury lodge in Northland. National's Foreign Affairs spokesperson Jerry Brownlee says officials should explain why he's not on the list.
If they have concluded that he is not a problem, then they'd have to explain why other shareholders in the steel company have been so soundly sanctioned by other countries.
Alexander Abramov is not on any country's sanctions list, but another Evraz shareholder, Roman Abramovich, is. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, says he will steer the country through what he calls the new era of crisis if he's re-elected next month. The BBC's Hugh Schofield reports on his campaign pitch.
In a news conference lasting several hours in Paris, he set out the main points of his electoral programme, which include an increase in the armed forces budget to €50 billion and the doubling of the number of reservists. He's also promising to wean France off gas and petrol and to offer big investment in key industrial sectors such as biomedics and semiconductors. On social issues, the president wants to push back the age of retirement to 65 from 62, give greater autonomy to universities and make some benefit payments conditional on taking part in community service.
A 43-year-old man has been found dead at a rural property in Western Coromandel, and the police are treating the case as one of homicide. Detective Inspector Graham Pitcathly says the man's body was found by officers who arrived at the Manaya property at 12:30 this afternoon. Another man was taken to hospital in a critical condition. No one else is being sought in connection with the death. And more police patrols have been put on since a gunshot hit a house in Napier last night. Officers were called to the Taradale Road house at about 8:30. Then at about 1 a.m, a man who'd been travelling in a vehicle on the same road at about the same time arrived at hospital with moderate injuries. The police believe the events are linked. They aren't saying yet whether it's gang-related, but there have been several similar gang-related incidents in the city over the past year. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life isolates the gene that allows cows to handle the heat better. Just in time for autumn. Aldous Harding is our Friday night live act, and because cosmonaut Alexei Leonov went for a wander outside his capsule on this day in 1965, we've got a sonic tonic dedicated to spacewalking. On Nights, it's Out of This World with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Scattered showers for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Some may be heavy with possible thunderstorms, easing tomorrow afternoon. Mainly fine in Waikato and the Bay of Plenty, but there are isolated showers. Waitomo to North Taranaki, including Central High Country, mostly fine. Isolated showers tomorrow evening. Mainly fine for South Taranaki to Wellington, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. A few showers about coastal Hawke's Bay and Gisborne are clearing this evening. Partly cloudy for Marlborough and Nelson. Isolated showers mainly about the ranges. Isolated showers also for Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Some are heavy and possibly thundery in Bulla today. Rain developing in Fiordland tonight, spreading north to about Bruce Bay tomorrow. Rain clearing from tomorrow afternoon. Mainly fine in Canterbury, Otago and Southland, but there are isolated showers tomorrow afternoon about the high country and eastern Otago. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, a few showers tomorrow. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Claims tonight that COVID patients have been left waiting for antiviral treatments because Pharmac's been too slow signing a supply contract. But in a statement to Local Democracy Reporting, the government drug buying agency says despite the drugs being approved for use this month, it is the sheer demand for the medicine globally that is holding up delivery. At the moment, there aren't any antivirals that GPs can prescribe for COVID in the community, and they're currently only used once someone is in hospital. Patient Voice Aotearoa doesn't buy Pharmac's explanation for the delays. Its spokesperson Malcolm Mulholland joins us now. Kia ora, Malcolm. Do we know how long it is before we get these drugs in a form that they can be used in the community?
Well, we're not absolutely sure, no, but what's been indicated is that it could be next month or it could be the month after. But as for a date, we're not absolutely sure, no.
So after the peak of the current outbreak?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why is it, as you understand it, that people are still having to wait for this treatment?
Yeah, so what surprised us was that Pharmac went out for consultation regarding the two antivirals that treat Omicron in February. Now, normally what that would indicate in the Pharmac process is that they've just entered into a supply agreement. So whilst Pharmac last year entered into what are known as advanced purchase agreements, they're not actually supply contracts, which tells you the volume, it tells you the price, and it tells you when they will be delivered in New Zealand. So that would tell me that Pharmac were just too late in sorting their act out.
So they basically had an undertaking for a purchase agreement, but none of the details nailed down, as you understand it.
As I understand it, that's correct.
So what does that mean for patients?
Well, that means they just simply go without. It means that patients that could be treated in the home in the form of a tablet to circumvent the very worst of Omicron don't have access to these antivirals. It means that patients instead will have to go to hospital, and it will create pressure at that end of the system. And we all know now that we're currently experiencing a crisis.
Have you had any opportunity to speak to Pharmac about this, and are they providing you any information?
Not directly, no, but the reporter who rang me did approach them for comment and just said one simple question: when did you enter into a supply agreement? And Pharmac were not willing to provide that information. I suspect the reason why is because it was entered into in February, which is too late.
Well, this could all be put to rest by the disclosure of that information. So what's your message to them?
Just come out, tell us, when did you sign the supply agreement, the supply contract? And if it was in February, why were you slow? What's your reasoning there? Why was Pharmac involved in the first place? Because if we turn our attention to the vaccine procurement, that was undertaken by MB. They ran into similar problems, I must say, but it begs the question, why do we have two government agencies essentially dealing with the same outbreak? It, I think, creates confusion.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Malcolm Mulholland, who is Patient Voice Aotearoa's spokesperson. Online gaming can be a gateway to problem gambling, and primary school children are allegedly being drawn in. That's the shocking finding in the research, which identified young Pasifika as being at particular risk. RNZ Pacific's Alicia Foon reports.
More than 800 teenagers and young adults across the country were interviewed for the research. The Pacifica Youth Online Gaming and Gambling Research, led by Mapumaya Pacifica Service and Moana Research, says half of the interviewees were young Pacifica. Lead researcher Dr. Siene Tofa says the results are concerning.
It was shocking. You've got young people as young as primary school age who are developing some harmful behaviours as a result of their excessive gaming. 2/3 of Pacifica survey respondents spent on average 2 to 5 hours of gaming in one session.
Dr. Tofa says participants revealed that family members as young as 5 are showing symptoms of gaming harm. Gerhard Birking, health promotion lead for gambling service provider Mapumaya, says the study also found a worrying association between gaming and gambling. Young Pacifica gamers spent more money than other groups on loot boxes. Lucky dip boxes that yield virtual rewards and cost gamers real money are a huge concern.
And when looking at whether they've spent over $20 per month on loot boxes, Pacific were a little bit, they're non-Māori, non-Pacific, 22% compared with 10%. And that's a worry for us. These are the same techniques that the gambling industry use to encourage gamblers to play longer or spend more money.
Loot boxes are recognised as a form of gambling in Belgium, and even China has safeguards to regulate them. Leva, Senior Manager for Suicide Prevention, Leilani Fanai-Clark, says although there are some benefits to online gaming, the harm it can cause over a long period of time can be damaging.
I think in terms of those harmful effects, it really is around how does it disrupt those patterns of behaviour for our young ones, like sleep, like aggression and anxiety. Are they losing track of time? They're spending large amounts of time thinking about gaming or when their next gaming session is. And so the actual activities in real life actually start to dwindle. They're actually not spending a lot more time doing those things that they would offline that they usually would enjoy. Are their habits changing in regards to eating while they're playing games, or they're not eating at all?
Here's her advice for worried parents.
Are we providing the space for our children to actually talk about gaming? There are helplines out there for our parents, even for our young ones. I guess the first one that comes to mind would be the Need to Talk 1737, which is really good. It's free call and it's free text 24/7. And the reassuring thing about it is that there's a trained counsellor on the end of the line. At Levar, we have information for both the gamer and for parents, and I like to talk about what is healthy gaming.
Mr. Birking hopes the research findings will lead to more studies and says it's crucial the government recognise loot boxes are a mode of gambling and must be regulated.
It is 13 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and so much feedback from you on National's proposal to scale back COVID restrictions. This listener says regarding Chris Luxon wanting to open up, there were 2,017 deaths from COVID in the US yesterday. How is this even close to being back to normal? Chris Luxon has a one-track mind to look after the business sector and to the hell with the rest, says this listener. But another person says, if we listened to the experts, we would probably be still locked up in 2025. For most of us in Auckland, we have either had COVID or been exposed numerous times and dodged the bullet. Time to move on. Leanne, though, says, nice to hear the National Party putting the economy ahead of public health. And this one from Mike in Auckland. Let's get to Chris Luxon's new normal ASAP. Team New Zealand deserves it. The only losers will be the non-team members who have chosen not to get vaccinated. And Cara says, finally, someone in tune with what's happening in New Zealand and the rest of the world. Yes, we're one of the last countries to have COVID restrictions, and the people of New Zealand have had enough of harsh and unjustified authoritarianism, which is not related to health. Thank you, Chris Luxon, for seeing it for how it is. How did you get to work today? Drive, cycle, bus, train, plane, or for some of us, a walk to the kitchen table these days? And how much carbon did that commute cost the planet? Too few fingers, no calculator, and limited bandwidth to work it out. It's hoped a new app will help businesses easily calculate the carbon cost of their workers' trips and encourage companies to cut that carbon footprint or offset it. Benjamin Welsh from Abely, the transport tech company behind the app, explains how it works.
The employees would follow an online link, so they would go in their browser and just fill out the survey where they'll input how they traveled to work in the past week. So they'll have a choice to input which office they went to, the vehicle they used, for example, which mode they used, whether they took a bus or walk. And then they will be able to answer some optional questions that the employer has set, for example, asking them if they're interested in a carpooling scheme or any other workplace initiative. And then at the end, the employee will see an estimate of their annual commuting emissions that will be calculated on the spot. So that's giving employees feedback on their emissions. Now, on the employer side, for each workplace or for each office, they'll be able to see how their employees travel to work and also to see the associated emissions, which is what they can use for sustainability reporting at the end of the day.
Right, so they'll know what the carbon miles basically are. But this is all before the worker gets through the door to get to work. So why should the company take responsibility for those carbon miles?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. And actually, I think lots of employers still haven't really realized how much they can influence. So in some other countries, for example, in France, where I'm from, there's a requirement for employers to contribute to employee public transport passes, for example, or to subsidize miles cycled or kilometers cycled. So there's a clear recognition in other places that the employer has a role to play. And actually what we found working with clients is that if you provide the right facilities to your employees, including cycle parking or car parking spaces that are reserved for carpoolers, then you can really change behavior, actually. And when a company wants to reduce emissions, then that's a good place to contribute to reductions.
Where is the line, though, Benjamin? Because what if they start asking to look in my lunchbox and whether I use cling wrap to wrap up my peanut butter sandwich? And what about the clothes I wear to work? And if they give me a uniform, the carbon miles and all of that, should we be calculating all of that too? And who should be responsible for that?
Yeah, it's definitely on the boundary. I think personally it is a shared responsibility between the employer and the employee. But we can't expect people to make the right commuting choices if they're not given the options. There's also standards, international standards on how to report on emissions, and commuting emissions are one category of emissions that's typically optional for businesses to report on, but is clearly something that has been recognized as being partly the responsibility of the employer in those international standards.
So that we can picture this, Benjamin, can you just give us an example, like a typical trip and how much that translates to in terms of CO2 every year? Could you give us a real example?
It's going to be ballpark figures, of course. If you're someone who drives to work every day, for example, and say the distance is somewhere between 8 and 10 kilometers, then you'd be looking at between 1 and 2 tons of CO2 per year, depending on the car you used. That's quite significant because it's basically 5 to 10 return flights, Auckland to Christchurch return flights.
So Benjamin, for that 1 to 2 tonnes, as you're saying, is quite a lot. What would I have to do to zero the ledger? I mean, can you tell me how many trees I'd have to plant or what else I might have to do in order to account for that?
So the best ways to avoid. So working from home has boomed in the past few years, and it's one of the best opportunities to reduce commuting emissions. And when I say that, working from home just 1 day a week, if you look at it, that's already a 20% reduction of your commuting emissions. So people can make a large impact just by changing their habits at least 1 day a week. And then if they do have to travel, look at carpooling. There must be some people going in the same direction. You can combine public transport with, for example, an e-scooter, or you can cycle. We're seeing more and more that people are cycling longer distances now with the availability of e-bikes. So when in the past 10 kilometers cycling would have been a lot, now on an e-bike actually it's very achievable.
So Benjamin, on a typical day, how do you get to work?
I cycle to work and I do work from home quite frequently as well.
And is that your own pedal power or have you got an electric bike?
It's absolutely human powered, yes.
Benjamin Walsh there. In the small town of Bucha, about 30 kilometres from the Ukrainian capital, a new baby was born under the most difficult of circumstances. The town had come under relentless bombardment since the start of the war. By the time the baby was born, there was no electricity, no heating and no doctor to help the first-time mother, 21-year-old Anna. The BBC's Abdul Jalil Ardura Solov has the story.
Anna Timchenko was scared when the fighting in Bucha started at the end of February. She was due to give birth any day, but instead of going to hospital, she had to hide in a basement. The shooting is very close, she says, in the video she recorded during those days.
It was impossible to sleep. We sat and prayed that we could return home alive. It was very scary. I just couldn't believe that it was all happening with us.
Anna is 21, and it was her first pregnancy. Her husband, Volodymyr, was torn between remaining in Bucha or trying to flee. When they did finally try to escape by car, they had to turn back when they heard that a column of Russian military vehicles was heading their way.
We then decided to stay in the apartment. I preferred to give birth at home and not in a cold, dusty basement. I had difficulty breathing. My lungs hurt.
When she went into labor late on the 7th of March, she called her neighbors for help. They agreed to come, but none of them had any experience delivering babies. Victoria Zabrodskaya is one of those neighbors.
We worked intuitively. We looked at each other asking what to do next. We all tried to recall our own experience when we gave birth. We were worried that if something went wrong, we wouldn't know what to do then.
In desperation, Anna's neighbors tried to contact medical staff, but the phone signal was poor. They were eventually able to make contact with a gynecologist in Bucha after getting a signal from the balcony. He agreed to come, but never appeared. Later that day, he messaged to apologize and explained that he had been stopped by a Russian patrol who had broken his phone. The neighbors would have to deliver the baby themselves. Anna had never imagined that she would give birth in such horrific conditions.
The room was lit with candles because there was no electricity. There was no heating either. They also cut off gas and water. We had a few bottles of water, but it was icy cold, so we couldn't use it to wash. And shooting outside never stopped.
This was the happiest moment for everyone. Baby Alisa was born on the 8th of March. But Victoria Zabrodskaya says that until that moment, they hardly dared to breathe.
When the baby's head came out, we got scared. She was blue and we didn't know what to do. Then we gently turned the baby's head and she came out. But she didn't cry at first. We started hitting her and then she cried and we all cheered.
2 days later, it was announced that Bucha was one of the evacuation corridors agreed between the Ukrainian government and the Russian Defense Ministry. Anna and her husband decided to leave with their newborn. The following day, 21 cars left heading towards Kiev.
In Australia, unemployment has dropped to just 4%, the lowest in 13 years, and economists expect it to drop even lower. But the federal government is being warned there is no political capital in a growing economy if voters aren't sharing the rewards. The ABC's Tom Lowry reports.
Canberra can be quite a beautiful city, and landscape photographer Scott Lego makes a living selling it.
People that want souvenirs or keepsakes from Canberra, terrific for that.
His Kingston studio has been doing a solid trade, selling photos, postcards and plenty of puzzles during the pandemic. So well, in fact, he's looking to put on more sales staff.
We're on the hunt for people to join the team here and certainly finding it challenging to try and find the right stuff.
2 jobs have been advertised for months with no solid candidates. Scott has considered offering more money, but says he's not quite ready yet.
As a small business, your capacity to offer, more money is limited because obviously that's got to come from somewhere. And in our case, that would mean then charging customers, more. We obviously pay, above award rates already in that regard. So there's only so much movement that a business like ours can have in regard to that.
It's a familiar story among employers and workers across the country. Unemployment has rarely been lower and is expected to fall further still. But despite businesses competing for staff, wages still aren't climbing as fast as many would like. In fact, considering the rising cost of living, real wages are actually going backwards. It's a political problem for the coalition, banking on a roaring economy to lift their election prospects.
There's quite a few workers who can't see an uplift in wages growth straight away, even if the labour market's quite tight as it is right now.
Sarah Hunter is a senior economist with KPMG. She says anyone hoping to see low unemployment spark a sudden surge in wages growth will likely be disappointed. While there is some movement in parts of the private sector, it hasn't spread across the economy as yet. But there are positive signs out there.
We've got a very low unemployment rate, record high participation rate, decades low underemployment rate that's back to where it was in 2011, 2012, and that it's across the whole economy as well. That does indicate to me that we're close to full employment.
She acknowledges wages growth has been forecast before and hasn't always eventuated.
If we don't get a lift in wages growth over the next couple of prints, then that's something that all economists are going to have to look again at and see what's happening and why and reassess.
The government's been hoping for wages growth for the last 8 years, so it's nothing new in them hoping for wages growth and then for it not to happen.
ACTU Secretary Sally McManus says wages won't start to really rise until problems around insecure work are addressed.
And that's essentially bringing in laws that stop employers calling jobs casual jobs when they're actually permanent jobs. That could be done very simply and very quickly. It would mean that workers had more certainty and reliability around their hours, and that gives them more confidence in asking for pay rises.
And she warns the economic mood matters as much as anything else.
You don't have a good economy and you don't have a good recovery if workers aren't feeling it.
After nearly 6 years in an Iranian prison, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been reunited with her husband and young daughter back at home in the United States. Another British Iranian, Anusha Ashuri, who had also been detained, has been allowed to travel home too. The BBC's Caroline Hawley has the latest.
It's the middle of the night. The plane's just landed. 7-year-old Gabriella can't wait to see her mum. Very much in the background now, the Foreign Secretary, as everyone strains for a first glimpse of the plane's precious cargo. At last she comes out. Can you even begin to imagine what she's feeling?
Is that Mummy?
Yeah.
Mummy! That's Mummy.
Richard Ratcliffe hasn't seen his wife for almost 6 years, but he knows that this is a moment for mother and daughter. A hug to make up for all the ones they've missed.
At her last birthday party, Mummy rang up and she was showing all her friends, look, really, I do have a mummy, this is my mummy. And I think bringing Mummy home and showing Mummy off will really validate Gabriella's insecurities there, knowing that she was right. She does have two parents that love her.
He too has a loving family just as happy at his release. Anushya Shuri is a retired engineer freed from prison as part of the same deal that brought Nazanin home.
It's a very elating feeling to think, oh, this is finished. We don't have to wake up and fight anymore.
And he also now gets to sleep in his own bed.
Sleeping somewhere with no bed bugs, in peace and quiet, without 15 other people in the room. Must be, I can't even begin to understand how it must feel.
Still left in Iran, though, is Murad Tahbaz, an environmentalist born in London, accused of spying after tracking endangered animals with cameras. She too was used by Iran as a political pawn, and after all she's been through, could face a long road to recovery.
Everybody in the country who has followed this will be deeply interested and want to see more of them. But it is absolutely essential that after the first exposure, they then take it easy. They then withdraw. And I think Richard has this message. I think he realises that's important.
Richard can now be both husband and father. Their daughter spent the night sleeping between them for the first time since she was a baby. Richard today thanked everyone involved in bringing Nazanin home, saying, "You've made us whole."
And that's us for the week. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. Have a wonderful weekend. Let's talk again on Monday. Same place, same time. Catch you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A Māori health leader says COVID booster rates in South Auckland show authorities have failed to deliver for Māori. Hospitals in the Wellington region will only do urgent surgery next week as they